Hello there, everyone. As you can see today in this week's video, I have a special guest here with me. It's Alec, a chronic pain coach and mind-body syndrome practitioner. I've known him for a couple of years now. We've also collaborated together on some projects. We'll be talking about that a bit later. But today we're going to ask Alec to share some important insight with us. He's going to take us through his story, and I thought that you could all benefit from hearing Alec's story as opposed to just hearing my own personal stories or my own insights. So I'm really excited to get started with Alec here. Welcome, Alec. Thanks for being here with
Miriam.
me.
Yeah, it's really good to be here, and really excited to collaborate, continue to collaborate, and share some cool insights with everybody here.
Definitely. Would you mind starting with sharing a little bit how you got into the TMS world, like your personal story and why you decided to become a coach and help people overcome chronic pain?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like many people, I'm sure watching this, never thought they'd be going into the world of TMS, and for me, it was the same. When I was 18 years old, so this was way back in 2011, I wanted to be a professional cyclist, and I was racing semi-pro at the time. My former teammates include current national and world champions, and I was really focused on just being professional. And I had a big race coming up, actually one that Lance Armstrong had won 2 years prior. And it was the first time that I was racing in this new category. And 9 days before this race, I was just out on a training ride, riding along, and I felt this horrific pain in my lower back. It was like a lightning bolt in my low back, spasms and everything. I couldn't bend my back. I had to literally like keep my back straight and pedal home, and nothing happened. There was no crash. There was no trauma or anything like that. And I was like, what exactly happened? Went to a chiropractor who said, Alec, don't worry. In 2 weeks, you're going to be back on top. Just, ice it, do these exercises, you'll be fine. And of course, 2 weeks turns to 2 months, turns to 4 months, and I'm not getting better. I'm actually starting to get worse, and I'm in constant pain. And not only does my cycling season just start to go down the drain, all of the training that I had put into this season was just going out the window. But I had trouble just sitting in my college classes. I was starting to feel depressed, and pain was like really just engulfing me. And fast forward, I was diagnosed 6 months after the initial pain with a ruptured L4, L5 disc and a herniated L5S1. And I went through a series of nerve root injections, physical therapists, chiropractors, acupuncturists, energy healers, you name it. And it wasn't helping. And it actually got worse to the point where I had to withdraw from college. I was at home, partially bedridden, eating my meals standing up, depressed, on opioids, and had suicidal thoughts. And I was terrified that this was going to be the rest of my life.
It's interesting though, Alec, if I can interrupt you a little bit. It's interesting that you got these diagnoses, like with the ruptured disc at L5, when you didn't actually have an accident. It's as if these diagnoses just popped out of nowhere.
Yeah, it's a good point. And the connection that I made with my mind is I remember seeing photos of myself during races, and I was like as aerodynamic as you can get. Like I was bent over the handlebars, my back was pretty much flat. And I was thinking, oh, I was bending from my back and not at my hips, so it was creating a lot of pressure on my spine. So it makes all the sense in the world why I'd have a ruptured disc as a result of that. And I just internalized this belief like, oh, my body just must be weak, and I'm gonna have to deal with this for the rest of my life. So that was like the connection that I made. And of course, things changed, thankfully. And I was given a copy of Healing Back Pain by Dr. John Sarno, and by my mom, actually. And at first I was super dismissive, because I was like, I've seen my ruptured disc. You can't tell me that, like, I've seen it on an MRI. You can't tell me that's not what's causing my pain. And then I picked it up again a little while later and just saw myself on it every page. The perfectionism, the people pleasing, the pressure to perform, and connecting my own self-worth to how fast I could ride a bicycle. And it just made so much sense that I would get this pain seemingly out of nowhere, but right before I was doing this really big event where, quite honestly, I wasn't going to do very well. I probably wasn't going to be able to finish the race. And my my mind was essentially protecting me from that really big blow, because I would have felt so bad about myself. I would have feel like I didn't have a good relationship with my coach and some of my teammates at the time, and felt like I would have made fun of or been dismissed. And so
it's interesting. So it's like pain is a more acceptable reason to stop racing than, let's say, personal failure. Right.
Exactly. And this happens so often with athletes. So I specialize in working with athletes.
Yes.
And before competitions, it's not uncommon to have these symptoms that arise, because it's like this fear of what happens if this doesn't go well. We've put so much time, effort, and energy into this. And can you handle not doing well? Can you handle failure, essentially, and what that will mean for your own self-worth and how people perceive you? It's a huge pressure.
True. And I'm just recalling right now, many of you would be familiar with Simone Biles, the US gymnast who did so well in the recent Olympics. She had also stopped competing in the previous Olympics because she had this symptom of disorientation when she was doing the tumbling. And luckily, they recognized that it was a mind-body symptom. In that sense, it was kind of obvious that it was a mind-body symptom, nothing physical. But what really impressed me was that she said she knew it was time to take a step back, only to get, into gymnastics even stronger later on. She knew that she needed to do some work first, and that's why she had decided not to compete further in the previous Olympics. And now she competed in the last Olympics and did really, really well. She came back much stronger mentally.
I love that example, because you're right. How many athletes would have just tried to push through it, and where would that have led her? Like, I think of another Olympian, Michael Phelps, the most decorated Olympian of all time, who he struggled with depression. And as we know, the neural circuits that create depression and chronic pain are very interrelated.
Yes.
And for him, there was a quote that he had where he just said, any vulnerability I saw as weakness. I didn't want to give my competitors an edge. And so I was stuffing down all negative emotions until I just didn't feel anything anymore. And for him, he had achieved everything, right? And he said, look, where do you go when you've done things that nobody in the world has done before? And when your self-worth is tied to that, to being Michael Phelps, it's a pretty steep fall. And so, two different paths, I think, with Simone and Michael in their recoveries.
Yes, true. But yours is a wonderful example of how you can still be diagnosed with something, let's say, abnormal in the body, but that can still not be the cause of your pain. You never know. You might have had these herniations or this rupture way before you actually felt this symptom. And in most cases, as we know now, these are incidental findings. You find them if you do an MRI. You never get to know about them if you never do an MRI, and you might be pain-free.
Right. And yeah, like you said, if you were to take 100 people off the street who have no back pain and give them MRIs, roughly 2/3 of them would have some sort of spinal abnormality. Yes. And have no pain whatsoever, be asymptomatic. And for me, what's really interesting is in my recovery, within reading Sarno's book and going through his practices, within a few weeks, my pain really started to shift and decrease. And it went into my mid-back. And that's when I realized, after two and a half years of low back pain, it all shifted to my mid-back. And I'm like, okay, I have it on the run. And what's really interesting is thinking, well, okay, if that ruptured spinal disc was really causing my pain, why would all of my pain shifted to my mid-back? And I had sensed before I read Sarno's book that there was this correlation between stress or emotions. I wasn't exactly sure, my mental state and the pain itself, because I could have days where I would be very diligent with whatever the doctors told me to do. ice my back, be horizontal, take ibuprofen or pain medication, whatever they said, I would do it. And I could have more pain on those days than the days where I did everything they said not to do. And I started to think, okay, there's something else going on there. And it wasn't until I read Sarno's book that everything clicked into place.
Chances are you were doing these things out of fear. So, okay, you were following their instructions, but out of fear of making your symptoms worse. And I'm a strong believer that healing isn't really possible in a state of fear, in a dominant state of fear, right? Even if the exercises you're doing or whatever you're doing is from a good intention, even if an exercise is beneficial for you at the end of the day, if you're doing it out of fear to try to prevent the worst, it's not going to work.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. Either prevent the worst or get rid of something, it simply does not work. And one piece that was really clear on my journey is that if I look back on all those practitioners that I went to, the common thread, not only did the things not generally work, but I was giving away my own power, my own healing abilities. I was essentially saying, I don't know what's wrong with me. And this doctor, this physical therapist, this chiropractor knows much more than I do about my body. So I'm going to trust them. And there's nothing wrong with trusting somebody else and being able to follow somebody else. But I was really giving away my power.
Yes.
And I think it's so often that we live in a world of quick fixes, or where we expect quick fixes to problems. And it's so much easier to say, this pill, this procedure, this practitioner is going to fix me. It's harder to say, actually, maybe I am my mental state, the things that I've done, my patterns are all the cause of my pain, and to look inward for those solutions as opposed to look externally.
True.
I find it's harder to do that sometimes.
Definitely. But you managed to get back into full-on physical activity. How did you gain this trust in your body to resume exercise without fear?
Yeah, and it wasn't what I'll say is that it was a gradual process. The pain decreased pretty substantially, but the resumption of physical activity and getting to a place where I wasn't experiencing symptoms took a little while. And there was a period of, I had kind of entered this period where I knew it was TMS. I was 100% convinced, and I was still getting symptoms. And I find that this can be common for folks as well. And I started to get symptoms that popped up in different places. So when my low back pain went away, I started to get shin splints, even though I really wasn't running or putting much pressure on my shins. I developed a tightness in my arm when I would be playing baseball or softball, and some other weird mind-body symptoms. And it was kind of like my body was telling me, until you really go inward and continue to do this deeper work, things are going to keep popping up. And so that's what I did. I actually worked with a mind-body therapist, practitioner, who helped me get to the root cause of perfectionism and see how much pressure I was putting on myself and start to unwind that. And that's really what led to the long-term benefits. I think of the journey as both a sprint and a marathon. The sprint component is learning your body isn't broken and resuming physical activity. That can be a really big breakthrough. The marathon component, I think, is the inner work that continues, even after the symptoms go away, because your focus is turned inward to living authentically and overcoming fear.
So true. That's a really interesting way of explaining it. Never thought about it exactly like that.
Yeah. And I think some people get frustrated with it too. They're like, when are these symptoms going to go away? And I think just the more focus that you put on them, the harder it becomes. Like you said, when you start to fear it or you force it away, it just doesn't work. And what I've realized is that, there are those messages that we need to listen to, that our body, our mind is trying to communicate to us. Not in a woo-woo type way, but just in a really practical way. Like for me, part of it was recognizing that I was pushing myself to be a cyclist when, my path was a different direction. And it was great. I really appreciated my cycling journey. But when I became pain-free, I decided not to return to competitive cycling. I no longer wanted to be a professional. I got back to it and did a few races just to prove to myself that I could. But I realized that chapter of my life was over, and that was okay. So I think sometimes these symptoms can be really great teachers for us as well, that we and show us lessons that we wouldn't otherwise see.
That's really true. They can be a sign that we need to release something. Like in your case, maybe you needed to release some of that competitive drive. It wasn't serving you somehow. You needed to go somewhere else to take a different direction. So it was a sign for your body that maybe that was the time for you to do that.
Exactly. And what I'll also say, going back to kind of making this full circle, recently, it's been over a decade since I had an MRI, right? I had an MRI in 2011 on my back. And I've been pain-free and unrestricted for over a decade, running marathon without any training and doing 500-mile bike trips and anything that I want. I don't think about my back or really any symptoms when I'm doing physical activity. But I asked myself the question, it was always niggling in the back of my mind, do I still have that same ruptured spinal disc? Because you talk about incidental findings, it's like, what would it say if I still had this? And so I actually got an MRI earlier this year, and the report was incredible. It was literally unchanged. My MRI was unchanged compared to 2011. And the technician, the doctor who wrote the report said, he used those words, unchanged. And to me, it was such a beautiful piece of evidence that structural abnormalities do not always cause pain. Because if I had that ruptured disc, 10 years ago and I had pain, I have it today, I have no pain, it simply can't be causing pain. Right?
Exactly. I have a similar thing, like that they said that like an abnormality in my shoulder, it wouldn't go away unless I have surgery. So it's I haven't checked like you did, but it's still there. Basically, is that it would just stay there forever unless you fix it via surgery. And again, the pain is not there. So it's so empowering knowing that whatever like imperfections you might have in your body, because we all have signs of wear and tear, and these can increase with age. They do increase usually with age. But whatever imperfections you have, it doesn't mean that they are going to cause extreme pain or any pain at all. It's just a normal process sometimes. It's just the way you are. And when you get this pain out of the blue, like you did, Alec, or when you get these multiple symptoms all over the body, alongside mood disorders like anxiety and depression, these are really, really clear signs that what's going on is a mind-body problem. And so many people these days still miss out on these signs.
Yeah, absolutely. And if it's a mind-body problem, you need a mind-body solution. Like all the pills, the injections, those treatments probably aren't going to help. Now, of course, we're not saying that, all pain is mind-body. There are, of course, I was talking to somebody who needs a double hip replacement and has gone to a mind-body doctor and recognized that, that's the case. But I think there is a huge undervaluing of, the mental and the emotional stress that can contribute to the physical symptoms that we experience, especially in athletics. Like if we talk about Simone Biles and Michael Phelps, there's a whole host of other athletes. You don't have to be, at an Olympic level in order to experience this, because many of us live and realize.
That's very true. I also notice it in a lot of people when they're going through something stressful in their personal lives. Their athletic life suffers, even if they're just doing it as a hobby. Like I've seen climbers who've had sudden like back pain just out of the blue at the same time that they are going through a really tough period in their lives, and they blame it maybe on exercise or or on the climbing, when it's really not the case. It's like so obvious when you look into it.
I have a great client story that illustrates just that point. He's a competitive triathlete, and he would talk about how his power numbers would fluctuate pretty substantially, especially on the bike. And what he realized is that if he was having a difficult week with his wife, and they had 2 kids, like both really young, and a lot of stuff going on in the household just with 2 young kids, and he realized, like, he looked at his power numbers, and basically it was very highly correlated with like how things were going at home. And that was his, instead of saying, oh, it must be bad sleep or it must be whatever, like he recognized, yeah, like when things are off between me and my wife, my power numbers go down. And so they addressed that, and it's something that has given him almost like a competitive advantage to be able to recognize, because other athletes, they might be stuck trying to fix something that isn't really the problem. So
in fact, this reminds me of kinesiology as well. Like the science of kinesiology, it says that our muscles go weak when we are in a negative, like emotional state. So like a conflict like that, as you said, can actually make the muscles go a little bit weaker. And that's why his performance would also be affected. Let alone then how it would affect also other factors like his stress hormones and his sleep and everything else. But what I mean is that there are physical consequences to this. It's not just in his head.
Yeah.
It's like things are happening in the body and that are reflecting this emotional conflict.
Absolutely. And, just ask Simone Biles and Michael Phelps and Naomi Osaka, the tennis player who had to withdraw from a major event due to anxiety. These pressures that we have outside of us can really affect us internally if we're not addressing them and trying to just push them away. And I find what separates, at least from what I've seen in my work as a coach, what separates the really powerful recovery stories from the people who maybe get a little stuck in this process is really that willingness to go deep and face their fears, the things that Sarno would say, the unthinkable thoughts and the unfeelable feelings. I think that's real deep transformation occurs in ways that you can't really imagine until you move through it. And every time that folks go into that and see themselves clearly, and maybe it's a difficult look, but they come out stronger on the other side, just like Simone Biles.
That's true. And I think another aspect of your work, Alec, that I really like is that, like me, you believe in the return to like full physical activity. And we see so many people who have made great progress with TMS work already. Their symptoms have reduced, but they're still scared to go, let's say, all out, to resume this or that activity. It's like there's still this issue of not trusting that the body is, as you say, usually in your work, Herculean, that it's strong. Do you have anything to share about this?
Absolutely. I think that's one of my main messages, is that the body is Herculean. And I have, example from myself and a client, but the overall idea is if we've been bombarded with these messages that our bodies are weak, fragile, paper mache, and if those aren't true, what does that mean about what we're actually capable of? Right? Can you flip this on the end and say, instead of living in a place of fear that my body's going to be broken, where's my actual limit? Like, how far can I push this? And there's some incredible stories of superhuman strength, for example, in times of crisis. And those things have always really interested me. So one example of this and how subtle the nocebo effect, the opposite of the placebo, can be, is this was a couple of years ago. So after I had made my recovery, I was training, it was in your program and training to be a TMS coach, and realized that I had been telling myself all these stories about how I wasn't a good runner. Years ago, I was told by a running shop owner, oh, you're a cyclist, you have the engine, but you don't have the muscles. You're going to get hurt if you run. And so when I was running, even if it was a short amount, relatively, a mile or two, I'd be saying to myself, can I make it? Am I I need to eat before this and hydrate and all this. And it was a grind. It was just not pleasant. And I realized, hold on, I'm in the same way that I was telling myself, oh, this ruptured spinal disc is causing my back pain, and that wasn't true. I'm telling myself that I can't run, and that's also not true. And so I decided one morning, without any food or water or my nose dilator that I was using to run, to just run up and down this mountain. And it was 6 miles, and I got back and I felt amazing. And I realized, okay, I've just been noceboing myself that whole time. And that led to a few months later saying, how far can I push this? And I decided to run a marathon without any training. And when I say no training, I ran an average of once a week for 2 miles and then did the marathon and was able to do it, and started to say, wow, this is pretty incredible what the body is capable of. And to this day, I don't know what that limit is, Miriam, of like how far we can push ourselves, not from a place of fear and needing to, but just out of curiosity and
That's
love,
so amazing. And I mean, we're not saying that you shouldn't hydrate or like, help your performance in any way, but this is just an example of what your body is capable of doing anyway. It's capable of doing all of these things. Of course, it won't get hurt or damaged just because you run a little bit, just because you engage in activity. That's just the fear talking.
Right. And I think what's really incredible too is that this, for athletes, it can be a competitive advantage, even when symptoms do arise. I was working with a client who, his name is George. He qualified for the Ironman World Championships recently.
Wow.
After 2.5 years of chronic pain throughout his body, and he's now chronic symptom free, but he'll have little flare-ups and things from time to time. And one of them occurred as he was transitioning between the bike portion and the run portion of this triathlon. And he got this foot pain, and he said it was a 7 out of 10 foot pain, but he knew it was TMS. He knew it was mind body. And so instead of trying to just push it away or stopping, he opened up to it, and he was like, all right, we're in this together. Like, I know why you're here. I know running for me is kind of like, that's maybe the weak link in the 3 events. And so let's just see, like, we're in this together. And it went away after a few minutes, and he recorded the fastest run split of his Ironman career.
Amazing.
So this can be a real competitive advantage when we trust our bodies and recognize that, even if we get a little symptom here or there, doesn't mean we push it away, but it doesn't mean that anything is necessarily wrong with the body.
And I like that phrase you use, or that your client used actually, let's just see. That's a phrase that indicates curiosity and openness to the outcome. It's the opposite of acting from a place of fear or resistance to a particular outcome, which is what increases the symptoms and the tension in the body. And this is the shift that we're looking for. These are the mindset shifts I talk about a lot also in my work, that you need to shift out of these fear-based thoughts and messages to more curiosity and empowerment. And just saying sometimes, just let's just see, it's you being open and more okay with whatever happens. That's already like inducing a release of pressure and tension.
Yeah. And what I love about what you just said there, Miriam, and I think your focus on shifting from fear to curiosity and to essentially abundance and joy, I think that is a really good way to frame this work, because so often those messages that our inner critic is telling us about, you can't do this, be careful, like, what if this terrible thing happens? 99.9% of the time, it's simply not true. And if it does come to fruition, I think we find that it's not like we have the capacity that we didn't realize to handle it. And if it does come to pass, it isn't going to be as bad as we think it is. And so, like, for example, I had a client who had a flare up, and he wasn't sure if it was mind body or not. And then he realized, if it is mind body, if it's TMS, it's going to go away and it's fine. And if it's structural, my body will heal. Right? Like, beautiful, just a beautiful place of, I'm okay with either of these scenarios being the case.
Such a powerful release of resistance, which is what you need to heal, actually.
Right. And, so often we're told, and I think, practitioners can also fall into this trap of, clients are coming to us wanting to get rid of the symptoms, and we want to help them do that. That's what we're here to do. And paradoxically, eliminating symptoms might involve opening up to them, right? And like really experiencing them and not trying to just force them away, because simply put, that just does not work. What you resist persists.
Amazing. I think that's one of the biggest takeaways you can, you should take from this journey of chronic pain. It's not about hurrying up the process or being urgent. As you said yourself in the beginning, you can experience great breakthroughs just by learning that what you have is TMS that can induce relief. But as you said, at the end of the day, it's like a marathon. You need to work on yourself, on these attitudes and on these shifts. Simply amazing. Now, Alec, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think the only thing that I'll add here is that the way that I see this work, there are two fundamental pillars. The first is being your authentic self. So often we're not sharing our truth because we're afraid of how it's going to impact people, or we're afraid of what people might think of us, or what it'll mean for ourselves. And I think being authentic, really stepping into our power, is such a powerful part of this work. The other one we've talked about a little bit is embracing fear, right? It's not trying to push it away. I watched a video of Novak Djokovic the other day, who is, one of the, if not the greatest tennis player of all time. And he talked about how when he's on the court, he might seem locked in, but there's a storm inside of him, and he has doubts, he has fears, he has outbursts like anybody, because he's human. And what separates him from, the other athletes, and what he credits his success to, is being able to quickly move through those emotions, to not push them away. So I think really embracing these fears and these emotions is so, so important. So be authentic, embrace fear is kind of my takeaway message there.
Amazing.
And yeah, to share a little bit about our project, I'm so grateful to have collaborated, because as people can probably tell, we're both active people, athletes. We like to push our bodies. We both received scary diagnoses, and we're told, you might not be able to do your sport again, and have made full recoveries. And so we created this program called Painfree Comeback. It's specifically designed for athletes with chronic pain to become and stay chronic pain free, to perform with a competitive advantage, trusting your body, and to feel like yourself again. And we put together this program and have seen some fantastic recovery stories. And from what the feedback that we've gotten, it's that there's so many different mind-body programs out there, and there's really amazing ones. But the focus specifically on athletes is really something that's missing in this space. And even if you are not a competitive athlete, but just an active person, a lot of the lessons are landing with people in a way that aren't covered by some other programs. And so that's why I think what we put together is, I'm really excited to share it with more and more people.
Yes, so am I, Alec. And for those of you who have asked me before, or who are thinking about what's the difference between my own program, the Painfree Breakthrough program, which I sell over my website, and the Painfree Comeback program, it's this special focus on those people who would like to resume an active lifestyle without limitation. So it's a little bit more focused on pain, on pain that's been blamed on repetitive stress injuries, on old injuries that you never seem to have recovered from. And if you're really, really determined to get back into athletic activity without limits, this is the difference. And there's also, of course, Alec's expertise in it, where he shares other tips and tools specifically geared towards improving performance, if you would like that as well. And also geared towards like resuming an active life or an athletic life from a more authentic standpoint, like while still being aware of your own values. I think that's extremely important, because you don't want to get back to exactly the life you had before you had symptoms, because that was probably a life of pressure, of tension, of not knowing yourself and your needs enough. So what we do in the program is we make sure that even if people return to their like normal lives, but they return to it from, with this different knowledge and awareness of themselves that would avoid, bringing on more symptoms.
Yeah, beautifully put. And a story to illustrate that, had a client recently who's a competitive cyclist who had been dealing with weight problems for a while and kind of compulsive eating habits. And he had tried all sorts of things to get rid of it. And what we talked about in the program of building self-compassion and really embodying your authentic self and connecting to your own values, he said that was a huge, huge unlock for him. He said he lost, 22 pounds, which is incredible given how much he'd struggled with it. And he realized how much his self-worth was tied up in, being seen as a certain athletic person. And when he started to release this, his power numbers went up. And actually, just the other day, he won his state championship time trial event, cycling event. Wow. So these are the types of transformations that we're talking about. You said, you're not going back to who you were before these symptoms. You're going to emerge stronger. And, what we say at Painfree Comeback is that your biggest setback can turn into your greatest comeback. And we've seen this time and time again with people.
So true, Alec. Yeah. So definitely excited to be working on this with you. We're going to be sharing more information about this program also in the comments for those of you who would like to check it out.
Can I just add one last thing?
Sure.
If folks are curious about anything that we've mentioned today, or are curious to know whether their symptoms match this diagnosis, or whether this approach can help them, we have an assessment, a comprehensive assessment that we created with Painfree Comeback. It helps you identify blind spots that are keeping you in pain and gives real, tangible, actionable insights as to what to do about it. So these are some of the same questions that the practitioners that we work with, and doctors that we've trained with, ask their patients in one-on-one settings. And so we can put a link just in the bottom there to this assessment. It's comprehensive. It takes about 6 minutes, and it'll deliver some pretty interesting things, I think, for people.
Thanks. Yes, Alec. And yes, all of these links will be shared in the pinned comments beneath this video. Anything else, like if people want to contact you personally, Alec, is there like an email address or a website?
Yeah, absolutely. So best way to get in contact with me is alec@painfreecomeback.com. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. I share a lot of posts on there. And yeah, I think those are the two best ways.
Okay, cool, Alec. It was such a pleasure having you and having this discussion with you. We always stumble upon like some interesting topics, especially because of our shared interests. So it's always a pleasure.
Likewise, Miriam. So happy we were able to do this. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, thank you, Alec. And with that, we can conclude this week's video. I hope that we've given you some good food for thought for today. And that's it for today. I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.